I would never have imagined that the arrival of my husband's friend for a family event could trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of my marriage. He decided to stay at our house, which seemed natural given the long way he had come to be with us. Our relationship has always been friendly and respectful, and I had no reason to suspect that this visit would be any different than any other. However, from the moment he walked through the door, something changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just a feeling that silently crept between us. Our first meeting after his arrival was casual, marked by a warm hug and kind words of welcome. The way our eyes met was slightly different this time, as if we had both noticed something that hadn't been there before. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to travel fatigue or my overactive imagination. In the following days, the small gestures seemed to carry more weight than usual. A hand on our back as we walked through the door, a lingering smile during breakfast. These small interactions, although subtle, began to build an unspoken tension between us. It was as if we were dancing around an unspoken truth, each movement and gaze charged with a meaning that neither of us was ready to discuss. I found myself thinking about him more and more, anticipating when we would meet in the hallways or in the kitchen. Each chance encounter seemed to electrify the air around us, a mixture of danger and desire that I knew I should avoid, but that inexplicably drew me even more. This mutual attraction, as unexpected as it was unwanted, transformed the atmosphere in our home. We were both aware of what was happening, but out of respect, or perhaps fear, neither of us dared to verbalize or act on these emerging feelings. I was torn between loyalty to my husband and the fascination with the forbidden that the compadre represented. It was an internal struggle that was beginning to consume my peace of mind, leading me to question not only my morality, but the very foundation of my marriage. As the days passed, the compadre's presence in our home began to feel less like a casual visit and more like an event that was slowly redefining the boundaries of my emotional world. The natural flow of our coexistence brought with it a series of encounters, each tinged with a growing intimacy that seemed both accidental and intentional. One particular afternoon, a coincidence found us alone at home. My husband had gone out to resolve some issues at work, and the silence in the house seemed like an open invitation for deeper conversations that, until then, we had both avoided. It was in this peaceful setting between the four walls of the living room that used to witness family laughter that our true confidences began to flow. We started by talking superficially about our lives, but quickly the conversation slid into more personal revelations. I discovered that he and I shared more than just friendship with my husband. We had similar worldviews, common tastes that we had never explored before. He talked about his passions, his unfulfilled dreams, and the little things that brought him joy. I, in turn, found myself sharing parts of my life that I rarely discussed with anyone, even my husband. With each confidence, the atmosphere between us became more charged. It was as if each word removed a layer of the veil that separated us. We laughed together, our gazes lingering on each other with an intensity that began to seem inappropriate, but at the same time irresistible. At one point, our hands touched as we passed a book to each other, and the contact seemed to burn my skin with 1,000 unspoken promises. That afternoon became a turning point. The emotional connection had deepened so much that the physical attraction, until then just a spark beneath the surface, now burned like an open flame. I was aware of the danger of these increasingly intimate encounters. but the empathy and understanding he offered me were things I was unable or perhaps unwilling to ignore. Each chance encounter in the shadows of our home now seemed predestined, and the line between what was right and what was desired became increasingly blurred. The emotional intimacy we shared was beginning to manifest itself in a palpable tension, an attraction that we both struggled not to fully acknowledge, but that deep down we knew had already changed everything. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. We had just said goodbye to some friends who came to dinner with us. The evening had been pleasant, full of laughter and lively conversation, but as the guests left, an unexpected tension began to build between us. My husband, realizing that he had forgotten to get something from the car, excused himself and left, leaving me alone with my friend in the room, still lit by the low lights and the soft music that was still playing in the background. We were silent for a few moments, each lost in our thoughts. The tension in the air was palpable, almost as if it could be cut with a knife. It was then that he turned to me, his eyes locked on mine, carrying an intensity I had never seen before. The silence was broken by his words, soft but emotionally charged. "I need to tell you something important." My heart started to beat faster, anticipating the words to come. He continued, hesitantly, choosing each word carefully. "These days here, living so close to you, they've made me realize something I can no longer ignore." He paused, as if he was wrestling with himself over whether to continue. "I'm developing feelings for you, feelings I know I shouldn't have." The air between us was thick with the confession, and I felt a mixture of surprise and alarm, but also somehow a confirmation of what I already suspected. His words echoed in the room, and a heavy silence followed. I knew this was a crucial crossroads, a moment that required a decision. Part of me wanted to reject his feelings, to reaffirm my commitment to my husband, but another part was intrigued and touched by his honesty. The decision I made at that moment could change everything. Facing him now, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, made a wave of emotion wash over me. I don't know what to say, was all I could mutter initially, my voice barely above a whisper. The complexity of my own feelings surprised me. The attraction I felt for him, now clearly reciprocal, and the loyalty I owed to my husband were fighting a battle inside me. We stood there, face to face, each one struggling with our emotions, while the music in the background seemed to set the rhythm of our racing hearts. It was a moment of tension and decision, suspended in time, where the future of our relationships hung in the balance, awaiting the choice that would be made. And then, in an impulse that none of us seemed capable of controlling, we found ourselves alone, locked in the room. The silence of the house enveloped the space like a blanket. Only the low sound of our breathing filled the air. The decision to cross that threshold had been tacit, a silent agreement, sealed with a look that spoke volumes. It was as if an inevitable force had guided us there, a strong current against which we fought in vain. As we closed the door behind us, a wave of reality hit us. We were about to cross a line that, once crossed, could not be undone. Still, at that moment, the consequences seemed distant, nebulous, while the urgency of now dominated everything. We looked at each other, the tension and anticipation palpable in the confined space of the room. "This has to be the only time," he murmured, a promise charged with a sad inevitability. We agreed, each recognizing the gravity of the pact we made. It was a concession to desire, an acknowledgement that, although wrong, what we felt was too powerful to ignore, at least for this one time. The meeting was a storm of emotions. Every touch, every whisper was tinged with both passion and guilt. We were fully aware of the transgression we had committed, the secret we now shared. However, in that moment, we allowed ourselves to be carried away by the tide of feelings that enveloped us, a complex mixture of desire and remorse. When the door finally opened again and we left the room, the weight of what had happened began to settle on us. We looked at each other, knowing that despite the promise of this being the only time, the dynamic between us had changed irrevocably. We now carried a secret, a shared memory that should remain hidden, protected by the shadows of that locked room. The reality of our daily lives awaited us outside, demanding that we resume our usual roles. But within us, a fire had been lit, further complicating the already tangled threads of our interactions. The promise that it would only be once seemed both a necessary vow and a futile attempt to confine the unmentionable. After that night, the silence between us became an unspoken promise of discretion. We both agreed, almost without words, that we would keep what happened a deep secret, buried beneath the daily routines and casual interactions that marked our coexistence. It was crucial, we decided, to maintain normalcy, not just for ourselves, but also for the sake of others around us, especially my husband, who remained oblivious to the emotional storm that had brewed under his own roof. The internal struggle, however, was a constant companion. In the days and weeks that followed, a feeling of guilt began to eat away at me. Every look, every casual touch with my husband brought a wave of remorse that was almost palpable. At the same time, the experience had acted like a mirror, reflecting the gaps and oversights in my marriage that until then I had chosen to ignore or downplay. I began to realize how much of our connection had eroded over time, how small cracks had silently formed between us, diluting the intensity and intimacy that once marked our relationship. This led me to deeply reflect on what I truly valued in my marriage and what needed to be healed or transformed. Confronted with these truths, I found myself faced with a crucial dilemma. Should I confess the betrayal to my husband, hoping that somehow this would give us the chance to rebuild and strengthen our relationship? Or should I keep the secret, preserving the image of an intact but internally fragile marriage? The days dragged on, and each moment of indecision seemed to add more weight to the burden I carried. The strain of maintaining the facade of a devoted, happy wife while hiding such a dark truth began to affect not only my emotional state, but also the dynamics of our household. Finally, after much reflection and sleepless nights, I made my decision. It was a quiet night, and I called my husband to sit with me in our garden, a place that has always been special to us. The stars shone above us, silent witnesses to the confession he was about to make. With a heavy heart, but with a clarity that only the truth can bring, I began to speak. I chose to reveal everything, not just out of a need to alleviate my own guilt, but out of a deep belief that our marriage deserved a chance to face and overcome our challenges openly. The confession was devastating. The impact on my husband, our lives, and our future together was immense and unpredictable. But it was a necessary step in trying to heal and perhaps, in some small way, rediscover our way to each other in a new light, with renewed honesty. It was a risk, no doubt, but one I chose to take, believing that the truth, however painful, would eventually guide us to a better place.